All right, first up in our Mastering Maneuver series is the Mighty Envelopment. Remember that the goal of the envelopment is to destroy the enemy in place by attacking him from the rear. And that attacking someone from the rear gives you the greatest chance to induce a psychological shock upon your opponent, which leads to their defeat. Envelopment also gives us the greatest likelihood to reduce friendly casualties because we avoid the enemy's strength where they're prepared defenses and attack them from behind. Now, we as a Dark Rifle Battalion believe that the enemy must be surrounded and destroyed to win. And that's best done by a strong, rapid, enveloping attack if the enemy is pinned down by frontal fire. Now, just to highlight that, understand that you cannot execute an envelopment unless the enemy believes that they are threatened with destruction from the front. Otherwise, they just pivot and it can't be done. Now, one thing I want to talk about real briefly from the last video to clarify is I kept referring to 6 forms of maneuver and I had 5. The one that I left out deliberately was the flank attack, and that's because I see a flank attack really as a portion of the envelopment. And that leads me to just a bigger point that doctrine writers kind of assert that these forms of maneuver can only be done by certain size of elements, meaning that a squad and a platoon can't envelop, but they can do a flank attack. And that battalions, brigades, yeah, they can get to an envelopment, but they can't do a turning movement. Turning movements can only be done really by the large divisions and corps and that sort of thing. Listen, that's baloney. A form of maneuver can be carried out at each echelon if you understand what you're trying to achieve. A fire team should try to envelop if it's attacking an LPOP. A squad can totally dislocate enemy defensive positions if they understand what they're doing. So, doctrinistas will argue with me about this, but remember that the forms of maneuver can be carried out by each echelon. You just need to understand the effect and the effect you're trying to achieve and how to do it. Okay, so first up on the envelopment, I really kind of can't talk about envelopments with really talking about the Battle of Cannae, and I hope I mispronounced that correctly. The Battle of Cannae is viewed by most Western military thinkers, particularly the Germans, as the perfect battle. And because of this battle, a lot of people have tried to recreate it as the way to win a war quickly. The Battle of Cannae occurred in 216 BC and was between the Carthaginians and the Romans. I'm going to walk you through just briefly about it, but understand there's lots of YouTube videos out there. I think if you go to the playlist at the bottom, I think I posted like a video on the Battle of Cannae. I'll do a much better job kind of explaining how it all went. But briefly, what happened in this battle is that in this one day, the Carthaginians, though outnumbered, were able to destroy a much larger and maybe arguably a better equipped Roman army, right? One day destroyed pretty much obliterated the entire Roman army. And it was set up this way. So here in this little diagram, I kind of showed that the Romans were set up in their typical 3 maniples or the 3 lines with their cavalry on the side. The Carthaginians represented in blue. They were kind of in this arrow kind of formation. As the Romans attacked, the Carthaginians deliberately pulled back and kept pulling back and pulling back. And then the superior Carthaginian cavalry started riding around and engaged the Roman cavalry, beating them, and then they fled. What happened was, as the Romans kept pressing and the Carthaginians kept falling back, it created kind of a concave, almost a bowl, where the Carthaginians then were able to surround them, and then the cavalry came from behind them and pressed the Romans on all sides. This created an effect where the Romans were pushed together, shoulder to shoulder, and they couldn't move. And then the Carthaginians attacked them from all sides and basically destroyed them. A lot of people say 50 to 70,000 Romans died that day, with only 8,000 Carthaginians killed. This, more than just this historical battle, throughout history, key military, like the Germans, the Americans, we always believe that we have to win fighting outnumbered. And how do you do that? How do you fight outnumbered and win? This kind of served as a mental model of how a smaller force can defeat a larger force in a decisive battle and win the war quickly. So knowing that always people have been trying to search and recreate the Battle of Cannae, which was a double envelopment on the Romans. Now, envelopments really, there's three types. So you have like a single envelopment, which we kind of have depicted here. You have a double envelopment, where kind of what happened at the Battle of Cannae. And then you have a vertical envelopment, meaning that you basically take air assault or airborne forces, you fix them from the front, and you go vertical, and you get behind them that way. Now, just briefly, let's talk through an envelopment, how it might go down. So here I have this little diagram here, and here we have our three, I kind of put it with companies again. This is a battalion, but you can array this if you have the forces, in a whatever echelon. So here we have our enemy in a typical defensive 2 up and 1 back. So the envelopment would occur this way. So we have our first element, here I just have as a company, would move up and they set up a support by fire position, right? And they have the combat power and they attack in such a way that the enemy, the effect they have is they're being suppressed and they feel they can be destroyed from the front. This will pull the enemy toward them and then create kind of that thing, that effect where you grab the enemy by the nose, as Patton always talks about. Once that occurs, again, once that occurs, there's conditions that have to be met before you progress to the next portion. Then the next force can then execute a flanking attack. You find an assailable flank. When you hear the word assailable flank, that means a flank that's open, right? You find a weak flank to their left or to their right. So that's what that word assailable means. It's a weak flank you can get around someone to their side, right? Once they execute a flank attack, then they can set up another support by fire position so the enemy is caught fighting in 2 separate directions, one from the front and one from their flank. Now, at this portion, once they have the desired effect that the enemy now is caught in this frontal and flank attack, then you can then execute the envelopment to get behind someone. And that would be done by an element that is not engaged. That is critical to remember. That element cannot be engaged. They come from a different direction and they maneuver to get behind them and set up a support by fire position. Now, this will typically come from that element's reserve. Now, if you notice, what has currently happened is, depending on the distance of this engagement, right, we could have, very close, a direct fire control problem between this support by fire position 3 and this support by fire position 1. That's mitigated because once this envelopment force crosses a particular phase line, support by fire position 1 breaks down and becomes the new reserve. So really all that's happened is we've grabbed them by the nose here, we brought them around to be at this flank attack, and then grabbed them by the collar here, and then that allows our maneuver element to get behind them to set up support by fire position 3, basically shifting the engagement 90 degrees. And then this element, the fixing force here, moves back and becomes the reserve. At that point, we are in a position now to attack the enemy from the rear, or we could attack from the side based on the conditions on the ground. So that's a basic envelopment. And if you notice, since that what we believe is the enemy must be surrounded and destroyed to win, this is being kind of, tongue-in-cheek. This creates almost a D, which is where we get, if you notice all the introductions, the dark rifles. Okay, so this is the basics of a envelopment, a fixing force, a flanking force, and then the envelopment force. A lot more to it than that, a lot of decision points, but you understand the basic concept. Next up, we'll talk about a turning movement. Okay, thanks for watching. Hunt, Race, Kill.